So do you find it really hard telling someone in your team that they've made a mistake because you just don't want to upset them and then you just avoid having the conversation altogether? Well, if that sounds like you, stick with me. We've all been there. I'm going to give you just some simple frameworks to follow, which will just make those conversations flow so much easier. So I'm Sarah. I've worked in HR for nearly 20 years now, and I've worked with loads of leaders. I've been a leader myself, so I know firsthand what it's like to have to go into a conversation that might be tougher than just a nice positive one. I'll tell you a story and a scenario, and then I'll give you just the framework that you can follow. If you are putting off one of those conversations, this should just be what you need to get that conversation flowing. So the story is, I remember working with a new leader and a member of their team had made an error in a report that they were meant to be sharing. So this leader had noticed this error and they'd kind of seen it maybe a couple of times before and hadn't said anything. And they still decided not to flag it because they just didn't want to have that discussion. So they left it. And then what happened is the senior leadership team arranged a meeting just out of the blue because they wanted to go through the report. So that leader and their employee turned up to the meeting, and obviously the first thing that the senior leaders noticed was that the figures didn't add up. So then they questioned the employee and asked them what had gone wrong, and that left the employee completely none the wiser, a bit surprised, didn't know how to respond. They felt out of their depth with answering that question. So the leader then had that horrible feeling you get when you heart sinks, your stomach goes, and you think, I just could have told that person exactly what was wrong with the report, that I've noticed it and I haven't told them. And then the situation's ended up a lot worse for that employee. Not only are they probably embarrassed and lacking confidence with that senior leadership team, it's just broken something in that relationship between the leader and the employee, because the employee knew that the leader had looked at the report, so why did they not tell them? So that's just a very good example of why you should leave a conversation, because most of the time it will end up worse than just dealing with it straight off at the start. So, a framework to follow. Let's go through that together. First off, we're going to go through just a simple framework of what you can say in a conversation, and then we'll go through an overall structure that you can just generally follow when you're having these discussions with people. The initial part, what to say. If we think of this example, then it's always useful to think of the situation, the behaviour or the issue, and the impact that it's had. So if we think about the situation, it can be quite brief in this scenario. Say to the employee, in yesterday's report, so they know when it is. Then the behaviour or the issue could be, I noticed that the total figures in the report didn't align with the source file. And then you're looking at impact. So what's the impact of that? Well, that could be, you say to the person, this will lead to confusion when the report is shared. And then once you've done that, you want to open up with curiosity. So my one thing I always say to leaders is just always be curious. Curiosity is your superpower, absolutely. Never assume you know what's happened. There could be a million reasons why that report's got errors in it. So then you can ask them, is there anything you need from me to prevent that happening again? That's honest, that's kind, and that enables them to develop further and work on that in the future. So whenever you're preparing for a conversation, just keep it real. So first off, reflect, explain, ask, and lead forward. If we look at R first, so reflect, that's all about preparation. So going into any conversation, as short or long as you plan it to be, always be prepared. So if you've only just noticed something and you've not sort of looked into it, you've not established the facts, that can come off when you go in to talk to somebody as either you seem unprepared or emotionally charged with the situation. So it's always best to reflect, check the facts, make sure you're clear on what the issue is before you then invite a person to discuss that. And then E, explain. So you then want to be able to explain those facts. And as we went through earlier in terms of that layout, in yesterday's report, I noticed that framework. And then the next part is you want to open up for them to discuss it with you. So ask them what happened, ask them for their views, how do they see it? So that will keep building that trust between you and the person, because so much I've learned over the years is about trust. It goes such a long way. It is the foundation of the relationship. So nurturing that as much as you can is going to long term really make you an effective leader. And then you have L. So you're the leader in this situation. So L is for lead, and that's just to lead the situation forward. So in that case, it would be, well, how can you help this person in the future? Is there any support that they need from you or for themselves? And then you agree on what happens next. So if the person's highlighted that there's actually something that keeps going wrong with their software, for example, when they're running the report, it might not even be a mistake they necessarily made, but they keep having trouble with the report saving the correct version. It could be a whole number of reasons. So then it's just, well, how can you then help that person also prevent that issue happening again? So if you've been avoiding that conversation, then just think about those two different, the tool and the framework. So the situation, the behaviour, the issue, and the impact that it's had. And then the real formula. So reflect before you go into the conversation, get your facts right. Explain what the facts are. Ask them for their views and opinions, and then L for lead. So lead forward, agree in action with them. So that should help you go into that conversation feeling a lot more prepared. So just to add, I'm giving my advice and opinions from my experience in HR. This isn't a legal advice. So if you're ever in a situation you need legal advice, then of course talk to an employment expert. Hopefully that's helped. If you want more content, then subscribe to the channel, Leadership Diaries.